Okay, we are ready. Good morning, PACAREA and everyone near and far. Thank you so much for calling into this morning's event. Start off by saying good morning and welcome to Vice Admiral Fagan and senior Coast Guard leaders. I'd like to also welcome our panelists, their family members, and everyone who has called in from near and far. Thank you for joining us today. We're very excited to be here and we have an exceptional event planned for you today. Our event is entitled Leading from the Front, Queer, LGBTQ+, Intersectionality and Inclusion, and is hosted by PACAREA LDAC with presentations provided by members of Coast Guard Spectrum. I'm Kevin Adams and my pronouns are he and him. I'm a member of the PACAREA LDAC and co-moderator for this event. I'm excited to be co-moderating with Caleb Taverdi, who is a founding member of Coast Guard Spectrum. I would like to start this event by introducing Vice Admiral Linda Fagan for a few opening remarks. Vice Admiral Fagan has commanded the Coast Guard's Pacific area since June 2018. In this role, she's operational commander for all U.S. Coast Guard missions from the Rocky Mountains to the waters off the east coast of Africa. In her 39 years of Coast Guard service, she has served on all 7 continents and has earned the Coast Guard's first ever Gold Ancient Trident as the officer with the longest service record in the marine safety field. As such, she advocates for and advises the prevention workforce, along with all of those serving the Coast Guard's PAC area. I'd now like to turn the floor over to Vice Admiral Fagan.
Hey, thanks, Kevin, and good morning, everyone, and thanks everyone for joining us. I'd like to first start by thanking our panelists, Commander James, Lieutenant Commander Young McClure, OS1 Womack, and CS2 Wade, as well as our moderators, Lieutenant Adams and Lieutenant JG Taverdi. Thank you very much for stepping forward today for this really important conversation. And I really appreciate you sharing your time and experiences, and thank you for your leadership and advocacy for the LGBTQ community. I also want to send a special welcome to the family members that I know have joined us, family members of our panelists. Thank you for being here with us today. I know many of you have worn the uniform yourselves, and all of you served alongside your loved ones. And you're part of our Coast Guard community. I really appreciate your enduring support and very happy that you can join us today. And thank you to Coast Guard Spectrum, to the LDAC for organizing this event. The PACAREA LDAC has done a fantastic job of planning a series of thought-provoking panels and presentations, and we've had a number of them throughout Black History Month. And I really just want to thank the PAC LDAC for all that they've done over the last several months to continue to lead and foster safe venues for these kinds of conversations. So in this year's Black History Month presidential proclamation, President Biden talked about how February is a time to honor the history and achievements of Black Americans, as well as recognizing the years of struggle for equity. And the president's proclamation also outlines the action he intends to take to close equity gaps and eliminate systemic racism. The speakers and panels we've had this month are opportunities to celebrate achievements, but also to learn and reflect on where we can take action to improve the Coast Guard, both from a structural, organizational perspective and culturally. The intersectionality aspect of today's panel is particularly important for understanding and acknowledging how multiple forms of discrimination or inequity can impact individuals and impact our service. And to honor history, we must first know history. And until very recently, Black LGBTQ service members couldn't tell their full stories. The trauma of don't ask, don't tell and the transgender service ban is still deep for our shipmates who could not openly share their true selves, and yet we're still serving our country. And the tragedy of not being able to ask or tell is that there is a void in our collective service identity. And I'm thankful and grateful for opportunities like this to help those stories come forward and those voices come forward in a empowered way. So the prohibitions on open service muted the legacies of LGBTQ members, and the prohibitions wedged gaps with regard to the understanding and the experiences of these members, many of whom still face adversity in certain segments of society as well as within the Coast Guard. So it's time to act to close those gaps. It's time to act to fill the void. And I am excited to hear from our panelists today. Our service is better with diversity. And when I use the term diversity, I mean it in its fullest sense of the concept. As an organization, we can only harness the benefits of diversity through a truly inclusive culture one that enables each individual to realize their full potential within the Coast Guard community. This is a goal of culture of respect, and it's with us each and every day. And this is an every member, everyday cultural endeavor. It's an environment where we experience mutual respect and trust. We recognize and embrace diversity and inclusion. We value the contribution of every member, and we are intolerant of behaviors that are counter to our core values. A culture of respect is not something where you can declare victory with a checklist. This is literally an everyday, everyone effort. It is not something that one training session will take us forward. So each of us has a duty to educate ourselves about the experiences and histories of those that are different than our own. And we need to incorporate that knowledge into our leadership, management, and mentoring every day. And panels like this are really instrumental in furthering both our diversity and inclusion and equity efforts within the Coast Guard, but more important, helping each of us to grow as leaders and members. So I just, again, want to thank the panel members. Thank you for your courage and your authenticity and your leadership in helping us to engage in this conversation. Encourage everyone to listen, learn, be open, and I again just appreciate the creation of this safe space for us all to have this conversation. So thank you very much, and back over to Lieutenant Adams.
Thank you, Admiral. I really appreciate those words and kicking us off this morning. Like Admiral said, at previous PAC LDAC events, we have talked about inclusivity. And this is more than just a word, it's an action. We need to strive to ensure members of all backgrounds are included in these important discussions. We need to invite them to speak and that they're heard. And this is an essential piece to achieving the diversity and equity within our service that we see. So today we'll hear about the lives and stories of 4 Black queer Coast Guard members and allies. These panelists will dive into a deep, honest, and open discussion focusing on Black queer lives, their experiences, and Coast Guard culture. We will also hear about our panelists' experiences in society and how we can create a more psychologically safe, morally courageous, and inclusive organization. In order to promote an open dialogue, I respectfully ask that we all listen actively with an ear to understand others' views, that we commit to learning, and to deepen our empathy to more fully understand ourselves and others. I ask that we each comment today, any comments that you share in the spirit of gaining or sharing information, not to persuade people. I also ask that we avoid blame, speculation, and inflammatory language, as well as assumptions or generalizations. And just before we get started, I'd like to go over some housekeeping for our virtual engagement. Please turn off your video and keep your microphones on mute if you're not speaking or presenting. We'll have time for Q&A at the end of the panel discussion, and you can use the chat feature to type in your question, or if you're on the phone, you can simply unmute and ask the question as well. So please note that this event is being recorded, and the link can be shared with those who can't be here afterwards. With that, I will now turn it over to my co-moderator, Caleb Taverdi. Caleb.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Kevin Adams. I appreciate that. I'm just want to make sure volume is good. You can hear me. Okay. Sometimes Zoom gets a little funky. I really just want to echo what Lieutenant Adams just said. Thank you, Admiral, for your remarks. I think you put some things very eloquently said about really truly doing the work on educating ourselves. And I think that is something that is so important. So that's why we're here. And I did want to also, before we actually get into this, and I read the bios of the amazing panelists that we have today, we did just want to touch on a brief history as to why Coast Guard Spectrum is here, but specifically why we're here today on this very event. And that has to go with recognizing in a previous event this month that there were some equity gaps in terms of certain voices not being at the table. And in recognizing that, we all sort of had these conversations behind the scenes to figure out what we can do to ensure that the folks who are most marginalized are having a seat at the table. And that's exactly what this event is today. And so I'm going to walk through really quickly sort of the basic LGBTQIA plus history within the military, just to sort of paint the picture. and to recognize that marginalization of queer folks, but specifically Black and Indigenous people of color within the military specifically has been extreme and still continues to this day. And so that's why one of the reasons we're here today is to start to unpack that and undo that. So as you can see before you, the slide, LGBTQIA history in the military. In 1942, we had racial military integration. So, you know, that's pretty self-explanatory, but that was in the 40s, in you know, less than 100 years ago. And then in 1969, we had the Stonewall Uprising. It's also sometimes referred to as the Stonewall Riots, but we use the term uprising because this was a clear violation of queer people's rights. They were gathering in a space and were attacked by police officers. And it should also be known that through that history, a lot of times it is not necessarily told that Black trans women were at the foundation of that movement. And that really kicked off the LGBTQ civil rights movement that we know today. Then in 1974, we had the binary gender military integration. And so that was the first time that folks of either male assigned gender or female assigned gender at birth were able to serve openly and together. Then you fast forward to 2011 and you have the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So that was sort of a monumental landmark for the queer community and sort of a first baby step towards being able to serve authentically. And then it's that same year, we had CGA Spectrum created and Commander Royce James, who is one of our panelists, was integral in helping form that panel. I'm sorry, not that panel, that group. And that was sort of very cutting edge for the time because it was the same year that Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed. So I'm sure we'll hear more about that from him. And then 2017, the transgender and gender nonconforming military ban that came from a tweet from the previous administration and was extremely harmful to many people in our community who serve with pride. And then in 2019, the group of founding board members, there's 7 of us, founded Coast Guard Spectrum and found a way to sort of get LGBTQ plus folks that are active duty or have served at one time or allies together and sort of have an actual virtual community, which we hope to someday not be virtual, but currently that's where we're at. And then obviously recently, as in last month, the 25th of January, the transgender military ban was overturned with an executive order signed by President Biden stating that gender identity will not have any bearing on a person's service. And so that is something that we are currently advocating for is being able to make sure that as we make this policy, we have the ability to communicate what needs to happen in order to make sure that we're not having equity gaps like we did in the 2016 policy. So that is sort of a brief, rocket through time so you can kind of see what has brought us here today. And so Coast Guard Spectrum is super excited to partner with the PACAREA LDAC and grateful to Vice Admiral Fagan for having us so that way we can have this amazing panel. But I'm going to actually get into the bios now so we can get into the discussion because that is why we're here. And so I will read the bios of our panelists and I'm going to put their pictures up. So here are our 4 panelists and pulling up the bios now. Sorry, I'm going to start with Commander Royce James. Commander Royce James's pronouns are he, him. Dr. Royce James is currently conducting plasma physics research at the Air Force Institute of Technology, where his efforts also support joint research with NASA. He is a father, husband, nationally recognized physicist, community organizer, scholar, and educator. His efforts at the Coast Guard Academy helped repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. He is a proud son of a decorated U.S. Army, Korean, and Vietnam veteran. He is a proud nephew to one of the 1960 Greensboro Four, who led a resistance movement against segregation. He previously served in the Peace Corps, where he met his wife. Their family was featured by NPR for raising their 4 children in gender-neutral household. He has served in the Coast Guard for over 20 years. Lieutenant Commander Kim Young McClear. Lieutenant Commander Young McClear's pronouns are she, her. Dr. Kimberly Young McClear is currently detailed to the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. She is a Black queer scholar, activist, engineer, cybersecurity fellow, and educator. As a proud graduate of Florida A&M University and first-generation American, she continues in the long legacy of freedom fighters from the African diaspora. In 2019, she was one of the few LGBTQ plus active duty service members invited to the State of the Union address as a guest of honor. In her 18-year distinguished career, she has been featured in numerous national outlets, including the New York Times, Forbes, and a recent cover issue of Glamour. OS1 Aaron Womack Gilliam. OS1's pronouns are he, him. OS1 Aaron Womack Gilliam is stationed at Sector New York as an assistant watch supervisor, sector operator in the Vessel Traffic Center. He has over 11 years of service. He is a Black gay illustrator and owner of the Black aesthetic graphic art business Black Roots Design LLC. Aaron has been part of numerous roundtable discussions about diversity and inclusion in the Coast Guard. And last but certainly not least, we have CS2 Deshaun Wade. Deshaun, his pronouns are he, him, and for the past 4 years, CS2/CS1 Select Deshaun Wade has held the position of Independent Food Service Officer on board Coast Guard Cutter Tybee out of Woods Hole, Massachusetts. Hailing from a strong Black military background, his 9 years of service contributes to the 58 total years served by his family, some of which who we have here today. Bringing joy to the stomachs and souls of members through his passion for cooking is just one mark he's left on the Coast Guard thus far. He mentors junior members at his unit, helping them reach their full potential in the Coast Guard and in life. Being the only Black gay member at each unit he's been at, he's taken pride in becoming an advocate for Black and queer voices. He helped coordinate the widely viewed Forward March video focused on having the difficult but necessary conversations surrounding racism, social injustice, and how it affects our Black Coast Guard members. With his next assignment as recruiter, Deshaun hopes to bring more diversity and inclusivity to Coast Guard by recruiting members of color and those of the LGBTQIA plus community. And once again, I just want to say, I think every panelist has family members in this audience, and we are so grateful to have you. As someone who has gone through and seen sort of the inner workings of this conversation, it is an honor to be in your presence. And I truly want to say that. And so without further ado, I will turn it over to Lieutenant Kevin Adams to have our first question to start off the discussion.
Great, thank you so much. And thanks to our panelists again for being with us today. So to start, our first question is for all 4 panelists, and we will begin with OS1 Aaron Womack Gilliam. OS1 Womack Gilliam, what about your experiences drew you to want to be a part of this panel today?
Good morning, or good evening, everyone, and good morning, everyone from the West Coast. OS1 Womack Gilliam here. As far as my experiences that drew me to this panel, I was always told that having told your story is important and your story matters. And so when you don't see a lot of you around, your representation is needed. And the proper representation of yourself, being a Black gay male, it needs to be seen more in a different light than what is always being seen. So I think that's what my presence to the panel brings. So thank you.
Great, thanks so much, OS1. We appreciate that, and love to have your voice here today. Thank you. Next, we're going to have Lieutenant Commander Dr. Kimberly Young McClear. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and thanks again to Vice Admiral Fagan and the PACAREA team for this opportunity to talk today. So for me, I was really just kind of reflecting on the theme specifically for this month for 2021. It's all about Black family representation, identity, and diversity, which explores the African diaspora and the spread of Black families across the United States. So for me, how I internalize that is I'm immediately thinking about my family, that many of them are tuned in now. They're spread across 3 different continents, first generation American. And so I just want to acknowledge my family. I want to acknowledge my wife. And beyond that, I think that just the work that we're doing within Coast Guard Spectrum, the intersectionality that we have, all of that comes with experiences and stories, and storytelling is so rich within especially African cultures, but certainly other cultures as well. And I guess the last quick point I wanted to acknowledge up front is I just wanted to acknowledge and celebrate the Black freedom fighters in Congress, specifically the late Chairman Elijah Cummings, and also Congressman Benny Thompson of Mississippi, for their tireless work in trying to make the Coast Guard culture better, so that each of us on this panel, those dialing in, those serving, and those aspiring to serve the Coast Guard have a safe place where they can thrive. So all of those experiences kind of drew me to this opportunity, and I'm just looking forward to hearing the other powerful stories from the panelists and getting going into the discussion. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Dr. Young-Mukir. We appreciate that. Next up, we're going to have Royce James. Please go ahead, sir.
Hi, thanks there, Lieutenant Adams. I appreciate it. Just a short correction. I wanted to thank Lieutenant J.G. Caleb Taverdi for the wonderful intro. There was one small correction, and that's I wasn't in the Peace Corps. I was actually in the 2nd class of AmeriCorps' National Civilian Community Corps, which is where I met my wife, and very foundational change for me from the course I was on, because let me tell you, she got me going the right direction. So I want to make sure I give the correct homage there. As far as being on this panel, I don't know if there was any way they could keep me from this panel. I'm sure there may have been some efforts somewhere, but there was no way I was not gonna get a chance to sit with these wonderful folks that are on this panel. There's so much here that's so rich. But I do think that one of the things I think is super important as an ally for a lot of places and spaces, but specifically for the LGBTQIA plus community my entire life, I think it's really important that we normalize, right? That we normalize that our folks, right, our queer folks are everywhere, and they're a part of us, and there's no separation, and that it's seamless. Right, no matter what demographic you fall under, no matter where you find yourself, there's going to be a person that is queer that's been contributing and has been doing that always. So I really love this ideology of the intersectionality and inclusion built upon the pyramid of innovation, which we'll get to later. I think is so apropos for Black History Month and for every History Month that we do from here on out. So with that, I'll pass it back to Lieutenant Kevin Adams. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. James. We appreciate those words. Next up, we're going to have CS2 Deshaun Wade. Please go.
Good afternoon and good morning to everyone. My experiences brought me to this panel because, well, for one, once I saw the opportunity, I knew I could not pass it up. For me and throughout my Coast Guard career, it's been people being their authentic self and sharing their stories with me that have helped me get to where I am. So once the opportunity to share my story on such a large platform, in my experiences, I knew I had to take the opportunity to do so, because I knew there were so many people out there that were like me that may still be afraid or uncomfortable to do that. So I felt representation matters. So if I can be just one of those that represents a small group that's not seen or heard very often, hopefully that would, take that lane of what's okay and make it wider. So that's what drew me here.
That's great. Thanks for your boldness. Thanks for stepping into this forum and sharing with us. Thank you each for your experiences. And I'm going to now pass it back to Lieutenant JG Caleb Taverdi for the next question.
Thank you so much. And thanks again to the panelists. Royce, I'm so sorry about getting that wrong. Thank you for correcting me and keeping me honest. Yeah, these people on this panel are amazing people. And so we are very honored to have them sharing their time with us. So the first question, specifically to a couple of our panelists, and we'll start with CS2 Deshaun Wade, is who inspires you? And just FYI, you're gonna already know who inspires them by the pictures, but we can't wait to hear you talk about these people.
Wow. So for me, I could honestly talk about this person for hours, but we don't have that time. So I will stay within my time limit. The person that inspires me is my mother. She is definitely the reason I am who I am today. My mother is a retired Army first sergeant. She retired after 23 years in the Army. But what's inspiring about her is the time frame that she went through the Army. She was a Black female in the Army, and during the time that she went through during the 80s and 90s, she definitely dealt with some challenges. And being a child to a single mother at the time, I definitely saw the effect that these challenges had on her, but I also saw the growth that she was able to have from these challenges. She went through things as far as being told that every time she ranked up, that was as far as she was going to go because a Black woman can't lead. She had, rumors started that she was sleeping around to get to, the rank that she got to. And she could have let those affect her and, let those stop her, but she didn't. She kept pushing forward. She was honestly offered the job of Master Sergeant before she got out, but she knew she had, sacrificed enough and she wanted to be more involved with her family. But seeing her go through those challenges, it inspired me to not let those things that I am told, those negative things that I'm told, the negative things that I go through, stop me from reaching my goals and my dreams, and ranking up and becoming a leader like she was. Yeah, that's pretty much why she inspires me.
Thank you so much, CS2 Deshaun Wade. We appreciate that, and so excited to have your mother with us today on this call. So thanks again for sharing that. I'm going to turn it over to our next panelist to answer this question, and that is OS1 Aaron Womack Gilliam.
So who inspires me? It's really one of the people that inspire me. But when I think of all the people that inspire me, like my mother, my sister, my grandmothers, my mother-in-law, and aunts and uncles, most of them are all women. And this woman is my great grandmother, Rowena Turner, and she's been and seen many lives, as you can see. And one thing about her is her spirit has always been strong. And, she values family, love, and through trials and tribulations, she's always pulled the faith, and she always does it with a smile on her face. And it's that kind of love that I inspire, or it inspires me to keep on going. And like I said, there are many people that I could choose from, but she was the first person that came to my mind. And even when you see her in these pictures, you see who's around her is my family, my grandmother, my dad, my sister, my mom, and I. And that's 4 generations, and my niece is a 5th generation adding into it. So the unit is the solidarity of she's the stronghold, she's the tree, as we call her, and the fruit. We're her fruit. And when you have a strong tree, you have no choice but to be a strong fruit, so to speak. So that's who pretty much inspires me in my day-to-day.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And two great examples of some very, very wonderfully inspirational women in both of your families. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to turn it over to Lieutenant Kevin Adams to ask our next question.
Great, thanks so much. Next question focuses on ally, which we've heard of in previous event. This question is going to be for Dr. Royce James. Doctor, what authentic allyship look like to you?
Oh, I'm so glad to have that question. Thank you. I think any form of allyship takes a lot of self-introspection and a lot of realizing that you fill a space in society, right? And so I think once you start to do that, and it's more than there's that time when you're a kid and you're like, okay, does everybody else sleep when I sleep, right? Like, there's that moment where you kind of realize it's not just the world revolving around your TV show, it's you're in with this larger, construct. And when you do that, I think that it's the next logical step is say, well, and where do I fit in the society? And then how do I engage with society and what makes us who we are? And I feel like that fabric that connects us is inherent worth and dignity. And when you start to really hone in on an inherent worth and dignity, you find that people make life choices. And giving people that opportunity to make those life choices and respecting that is living in that dignity. And as I find myself trying to live into that reality, it makes these types of things really easy. This idea of setting up a psychologically safe space and having some moral courage becomes a lot easier to do. Right, this whole idea of diversity, equity, inclusion that seems like this multifaceted, many orders of magnitude, many degrees of freedom, going into my physics and engineering language, problem becomes singularly focused. Right, you really just have to sit on: am I really living into this dignity? Am I really responding to the inherent worth of individuals to choose their path? And are we finding ways to do that together that's mutually beneficial? Right. And as we start to do that, it becomes really easy. And I know there's a nice slide up there with my daughter. If you could go back one slide, sorry, with my daughter there, I just wanted to make sure I give homage to, my daughter coming out very publicly in the Hidden Brain NPR actual video. And it was their first translating from a podcast to a radio show. And that became super empowering for us. And this idea of raising our children free of gender stereotypes sounds like it's really hard. And if you listen to the podcast, it is hard in some ways, but fundamentally it was really, really, really based on this ideology of inherent worth and dignity and listening to people when they tell you what it is they need. And I feel like if we can center on that, that's being allyship. That's what you do when you stand in a ring around a BLM protest as clergy, right? That's what you do when you go to the LGBTQ IAP plus protest and as the cisgen people stand around to keep them protected and buffeted. So with that, I think that answered the question. I don't want to take too much time. Thanks.
No, that was spot on. Just one audio check. I can get a thumbs up.
Sorry, could you say it again? I just missed it.
Okay, I think I might have a little bit of a delay, but thanks so much, Dr. James. Appreciate you sharing and in your physics analogy too. That's great, as well as lifting up your family. I'm going to pass it back to Lieutenant J.G. Taverdi for the next question.
Yeah, I definitely, I think there's a little bit of an audio glitching with Lieutenant Kevin Adams's feed, so we may shift to myself asking most of the questions from now on, just so that way we avoid any misspeaks. But I did, before we wanted to move on to the next question, I did want to ask Dr. James if you could expand a tiny bit upon this idea of psychological safety and going into what you were talking about in your last answer.
Absolutely, and I will be brief because I definitely want to make sure we hear from the other panelists. Please, 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 and if somebody's out there can drop into the chat. If not, I'll do it later. A link to the actual paper that Dr. Young McClear, myself, Dean Zolmanowicz from the U.S. Coast Guard Academy, and a few others of our colleagues wrote on the Healthy to Innovative framework. That's what you're seeing in front of you. And that idea of developing psychological safety is that place where people can feel their authentic selves that we spoke about, jumping into helping them develop moral courage, which then leads to being able to speak out and say, I can say that I'm not in the safe space, or I am. Going on to cultural competence, of course, then inclusion, diversity, equity, and that's how we get to mission readiness to actually do the mission. And only when we're able to do those things can we hit innovation. And one of the key things that I want to bring out, specifically when it refers to allyship, is we often want to jump in on diversity and equity, or cultural competence, or inclusion, without going through making a safe space, without giving the people the space to develop their moral courage so they can speak up, and then being able to be proximate and do their homework to get cultural competence, so then they can be included in making decisions and doing things in the space, right? So not to belabor the point, please go take a look at this article that we wrote, and feel free to reach out to any of us to talk more about it. But that's how we can actually make spaces and make changes in our Coast Guard as allies.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. James. Appreciate that. And this is just a quick visual of someone that Lieutenant Commander Kim Young McClear mentioned earlier, but Congressman Elijah Cummings, just an incredible example of a LGBTQ plus ally working in Congress to fight for marginalized folks. So I'm sure that will be addressed in greater detail with Lieutenant Commander Kim Young McClear, but we're going to move on to the next question. And this is going to be for the other three panelists. And this, let me get to the slide, is we're going to start with OS1 Aaron Womack Gilliam. And it is, what has been challenging in authentically expressing your queer identity within the Coast Guard?
Whew, that is a loaded question. When you think about, I joined in 2009, so that was still in the era of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. There are two things that stick out to me, that always stick out to me in my mind, that my husband and my sister that I've talked to about, and some cousins, that that's a difficult time when you are gay and you're joining a branch, or the military, as you will, that has this policy, don't ask, don't tell. So I remember when I came out, I think it was 2010, and it's been weighing on me since high school, middle school, back then. But when I came out to my mother and also my father. And my father, his career service he had a 28-year service, but while he was in, he was an officer. And by policy, you're supposed to report, that your son has come out. But he did what a parent is supposed to do. I don't want to get too emotional, but he protected his child, even though he didn't agree at the time. He protected his child, and he's seen that the work that he could do, he believed and he trusted in his abilities. So when you have that mindset, it's like a duality, as you will, and I can expand on that briefly. W.E.B. Du Bois had a concept of dual consciousness. He said it's the livelihood of being Black and being an American. So when you are in this situation, you're in uniform, you're a Black male living in America, but you're also a gay male in the military. And you're putting almost, and I don't want to say burden, but you're putting your situation on to another, which is your father, and he has to make that tough call. Do I risk my career at my son's expense, or do I lead and show him there's other ways and there's another opportunity? And so that's one thing. And then the other was I was in a situation with someone I was dating at the time. And of course I knew if don't ask, don't tell, but you don't want to be in a tight situation, you know, you don't want to be confined to a spot. And so there was a situation where I was assaulted, and my mind always went back. It took this long for me to get to where I was, and I was just 2 years in. It took this long to get where I'm at. Do I report it and risk it and risk getting kicked out off of that, because then I have to come out and say I was in a relationship, or do I just suppress it? And as a lot of LGBTQ plus individuals, we suppress things and we just keep it pushing. And if I always think back, if I had reported it, where would I be? And who would not have been able to reach out to with the story? And God bless my family. God bless my husband, because he's been there, and we've had these talks, and he tells me, but you're here. All the things that you've been through, but you're here. My sister tells me the same thing. My father tells me the same thing. So those have been the two challenging things as far as my queer identity or expressing my authentic self in within the Coast Guard.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and for being brave as a survivor to be able to publicly share your story. I think too often we silence survivors, and I'm just very grateful that you are willing to share that with us. So thanks so much. I'm going to turn it over to CS2 Deshaun Wade to also add to this question.
Thank you. So my biggest fear, honestly, my biggest challenge has been fear when it comes to expressing and being my authentic self. Growing up Black, it's a tough pill to swallow, being told that you're gonna have to always work harder than the next guy to get that recognition, to even be looked at as just an equal part. So then you throw in being gay as well, and it's like now you've become the minority of the minority. So then it's like, all right, now I have to work extra hard, and I can't do or say the wrong thing, or that could be the end of it for me. And my fear really comes from, even though, you know, you're in the military, not everybody has the same mindset as you. You have the fear of those that have the power to dictate your career, not agreeing with you, your lifestyle, the color of your skin, who you love, and being able to use something like that, to use that power to go against you. And I've been in a situation to where I went TD on a boat, and I heard crew members talking about someone in the command that happened to be gay. And I was like, well, okay, this is the Coast Guard. Like, that's, you know, not cool. I mean, it's not cool in general, but just hearing that kind of just took me back. And of course I was like, I want to say something, but here I am being TAD on this boat. I just got here. I don't know, like, I'm coming into this family of, you know, this crew. It's a small crew, like they all get along, and I'm just this new guy just helping out. And I was like, do I say something, or am I going to have backlash? I have a week and a half left on this boat. Like, is the crew going to, hate me? Is the crew going to band together? And the fact of me being in a military service and having to have those thoughts of fear because of who I am, that there could be, retaliation against me. But yeah, so my biggest challenge is just dealing with that fear and having to wear 2 masks, pretty much. It's almost like the minute I put on this uniform, I have to become a different person, not because I want to, but it's almost become a different person to make everybody else feel comfortable with who you are, rather than just accepting who you are and saying that, hey, you wear blue like I wear blue. We all, bleed green. If I was to fall over the ship, I would save your life just like you would save mine. So yeah, that's been my biggest challenge there.
Thank you so much, CS2 Deshaun Wade. Wow. Okay. We have one more panelist to talk on this question, and I just am so grateful again to all 3 of you, and all 4 of you, but specifically for this question, the 3 of you, for the vulnerability and authenticity that you are pouring into this, because that is not easy. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Dr. Kimberly Young-McClear to finish out this question.
Thanks, Caleb. I'm on the verge of tears already. I could feel it, so I'm trying to sip water. What Aaron and Deshaun shared is just deeply personal, and specifically the comment that Deshaun just made about having 2 masks. And I've often reflected on just how exhausting that is, to be 2 different people, or 3 different people, or 4 different people, trying to figure out which mask or face are you going to wear in which space. That's tiring, and no one should ever have to go through that. And so kind of answering the question specifically for me, what I have found challenging in being authentic with all of the identities, being Black, female, and lesbian. I joined the Coast Guard in 2003 through the C-SPY program. And I've had a very wonderful career. I've been fortunate to serve in a wide range of professional career fields, from marine safety, naval engineering, industrial engineering, splash civil engineering, and I was able to take those experiences, and I was hand selected to serve in 2013 as a special assistant to the DHS Deputy Secretary at the time. It was DepSec Alejandro Mayorkas, who coincidentally, 7 years later, he's now our current DHS Secretary. But that was, so this was a couple of years after the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but that was the first set of orders that I got, being at a unit, even though it was DHS headquarters, where I felt safe to be my authentic full self. And a lot of that safety, and this also ties into what Royce was talking about with allyship and just how your environment can make such a huge difference. I remember going into one of my supervisor's offices, and I had just dropped off a folder, and on the way out, on the wall, it was the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell was framed, and it was hanging up on the wall. And so I'm a curious person. I said, this is unusual. So I Googled who she was. And I said, oh my gosh, she helped repeal this law. Secretary Johnson was the secretary at the time, and just all the work that he's done. So it was just in the air. And I felt safe. I had told people that I was in a relationship with my wife now, Gail, who's she just retired in 2019. And so just providing a little bit of background, I saw and I felt and I experienced what it was like to be my full self and still do professional work. And on the side, I was also a full-time PhD student. So I was juggling a lot, but I never once felt unsafe in the perspective of I couldn't be my full authentic self. And so I left that assignment actually a year early because I was selected for a prestigious assignment at the Coast Guard Academy to be permanent faculty. So I got there in 2014. And so now this is the first military unit where my wife and I are both co-located, and we're serving in uniform at this unit. And it was a complete shock, to put it lightly. But I endured just degrading comments about our marriage, just feelings of I don't belong, I'm not welcomed, and things escalated over a period, unfortunately, of more than 5 years of bullying, harassment, discrimination. And so it was very hard for me to just reconcile, how can this be my organization that I'm serving? How is this possible? I just came from DHS, where don't ask, don't tell, the repeal of it's on the wall, and I enter into an environment where I did not feel safe at all. And so kind of the opposite of what Deshaun was saying about wearing multiple masks, for me, I just figured I would just be myself, because I was raised in my household by my parents and my grandmother that I am enough. I don't need to be someone else. I don't need to put on a face. And I understand why we feel pressure to do that. But I went into the Coast Guard Academy feeling that I should just be myself. And unfortunately, the culture, what came back at me was racism, homophobia, sexism. And so I was getting teared up listening to Aaron speaking as a survivor. And just what I've tried to do is, how do I take those challenges and what can I do, whether it's individually or through groups like Coast Guard Spectrum and so on, to help us move in a direction where we have a culture that doesn't just work for some or a few or even the majority, but it actually works for everybody. Yeah, I feel safe sharing it on this call. So at my lowest point, I had suicide ideation in 2016. I felt that with the exception of very few morally courageous people who tried to intervene, I just saw a dominant culture where it seemed that the attitude was, let's just sweep it under the rug. And I felt very dehumanized. And sometimes people confuse that with we're weak if we're going through a situation. But I see it as we're not. And I see it as these were forms of violence, and it's psychological violence, and these are psychological injuries. So it would make sense if you're being injured on a daily basis for years, that would have a tremendous toll on you. So again, I've tried my best to take those experiences to make things better for others. That's a photo of my wife and me at World Pride, 50th anniversary of Stonewall. And in 2019, I testified on the Hill. It was the late Congressman Cummings' last civil rights case and also last whistleblower case in his lifetime before he passed. And what has been shared with me by his team and his staff is that he was being briefed about the status of my case literally as he was passing. And his office conveyed to me time and time again the significance of my journey and how that can help make things better for other people. So it's definitely has been challenging, but I like to think of it as I may be bruised, but I'm not broken. So we all have a story to tell, and that's why I continue to be in this organization, is to make space for everybody to thrive, not barely survive, but to actually thrive as their full selves. So, thanks, Caleb.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kim Young McClear. I just want to thank the three of you for your strength, immense strength and courage, to not only share today, but to have existed and been yourselves and been in this situation to have these external pressures and these fears and these experiences. It's a lot. And I'm sure you feel that toll. And I did want to just share a couple, before we move on to the next question, a couple statistics that kind of go along with sort of what we're talking about today and just now. And that is, there's been some studies done, it's mainly in the civilian sector, but as we've heard from these stories, and you could probably ask any LGBTQ service member, LGBTQ plus people often have to downplay or cover aspects of their authentic selves for their psychological, physical, emotional safety. Things like hiding personal relationships or changing the way they dress or the way they say something or something like that, just in order to avoid discrimination. And it's shown that employees report feeling exhausted from spending their time and energy concealing their sexual orientation. That's about 17%, gender identity, 13%. And concealment is not an option for transgender employees who wish to begin transitioning. So it's all these sort of things that, we've heard from our panelists so far that a large majority of service members may not ever think about as something that someone is dealing with internally and having to make decisions on how they present and who they are publicly in order to feel safe or feel like they can survive in the organization. So I just want to once again thank the three of you for your willingness to share your experiences and the gift that is to us to be able to learn from that and hear from that and empathize with you and stand in solidarity with you. So we are going to move on to the next question, and the next question is a little more history, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Royce James, and we're going to talk about the origins of LGBTQ plus pride and how they relate to civil rights movements.
Whew, thank you. And I just put a little note in the chat to my fellow panelists. I just want to say it out loud again. Thank you so much for being here in your authentic selves. Just the love that we are really expressing here through just bleeds through our hurt and our pain. And just wanted to put that out just first and say thank you again. So just kind of bring it from the Bayard Rustin era of the 60s and tying the March on Washington, which most people don't know that was for families in poverty. That was really what the march was about, and how Bayard Rustin was known as the person. I forget what his nickname was specifically, but the gist of it was, anything you need to know about the March on Washington, you went to Bayard Rustin, right? And so if you then segue up from there to Marsha P, and P staying for pay it no mind, which is what she would say about when people asked her about her gender and what, who are you? She would just say, pay it no mind, Johnson. She absolutely in 1969 was the foundation, the pivotal, literally the sun of that universe would happen for the Stonewall and Stonewall revolution, and I'm going to use that word revolution as opposed to riot, right? Because this was a shifting, just like the civil rights revolution, right? That's been going on. This is just another aspect of that happened in Stonewall, and protecting literal lives from the police that were not just harassing but killing folks in New York City that were queer. And so I definitely wanted to be sure to say that that was one of the first times in modern times, if you will, that if you want to say like a movement or an affinity group or whatever you want to call a banding together of like-minded individuals of both queer and allies on protecting lives from this outside agitation. Does it sound kind of familiar? Well, we were doing it in the 60s, right? This isn't something that just started, and we could even roll that back, right? We can roll it back to all kinds of things that we don't really like to talk about, like, what happened to the Amistad, right? And how did it end up at the Coast Guard Academy? And the Coast Guard was specifically involved in bringing in these these slaves who were then freedmen because they freed themselves, right? And what does that mean? Is that a revolt? Is that a mutiny? No, I would call that the start of a revolution, right? This is something that we've been doing throughout history, right? Because our lives have been in danger, and that goes to the Black community, and it absolutely goes into the Black queer community. Not to take too much time, but if you start to take that in and pay it forward to the future, there's all kinds of statistics you can pull out, and I'll put some of this in the chat. But for right now, and according to the Black Census report, 38% of Black, trans, and gender nonconforming people who interacted with the police report harassment. 38%. 14 reported physical assault, and 6% reported sexual assault. And just by looking at the survivors on this panel that have already come forward, myself being one, right? You've now heard from 3 of us that are on this panel, right? That are talking about surviving sexual assault, right? So these statistics are hardcore in our face, right? These are things that happen, and we know they happen. Another piece that I really wanted to highlight, and I'll say some of these, but if we wanted, 62% of Black, trans, and gender nonconforming people live in a household where someone was unable to pay for a monthly bill last year. If you look outside of that community, outside of the Black, trans, or gender nonconforming, it's 53% of cisgender. Here's a place where we talk about that safety and how focusing on the most marginalized lifts us all. It shouldn't be 53% of anybody. It most certainly shouldn't be 62% of the Black, trans, and nonconforming folks, right? And these are the types of things like Angela Davis and the Black Panthers bringing in our free lunch, right? Audre Lorde. And we're going to talk more. I want to pass it off to Dr. Kim Young McClear to give more of this. But I just wanted to set a stage and get you in a mindset for where we are, and just the personal torment. I'm going to talk a little bit more about allyship and as we get further down, how it goes to some other parts of the civil rights movement. But I want to pass that off now.
Yeah, thanks, Royce, for walking us through that, and just the learning that takes place throughout these social movements. And I know on the panel, we all know this to be true, but you can't separate Black LGBTQ people from Black social movements, separating that from American social movements, separating that from global social movements. And I firmly believe that because of the intersectionality that we have, and those who have proximity to our intersectionality, we are not advocating only for what is best for us as individuals. And it goes back to what Deshaun was saying about wearing all these different masks. That's exhausting, and it's harmful. What we're advocating for is for everybody, not in just a blanket cliche statement, but we literally are saying through our own experiences, we know what it feels like, right? So I think the more, and I know Admiral Fagan touched on this as well in her opening remarks, is those layers of intersectionality begin to compound and compound and compound. And through that, right, wrong, and different, we have developed more empathy for other people who aren't even Black or queer, right? And so when we talk about liberation of all people, that's where it's rooted from. But I just want to very quickly just pull out some quotes that kind of resonated. They're not kind of the usual quotes that you hear from these individuals. So I just wanted to take a quick second. So Bayard Rustin said the following: "The proof that one truly believes in is action." So talk is cheap. We want to see what folks are doing. And so when we talk about doing the work, it's rooted in action. James Baldwin says, this is actually a question, and he says, "How much time do you want for your progress?" And he also says, "People can cry," as I am now, sorry. "People can cry much easier than they can change." There are times when we're operating in these spaces and people will cry, but those tears will stop. And when those tears stop, to go back to the original quote by Bayard Rustin, we want to see action. The next quote, Angela Davis. I know sometimes the word radical can seem radical, but here's what she says: "Radical simply means grasping things at the root." Right? And so I'm also thinking about what Aaron said about his great grandmother and the tree and the fruit, right? and where we can grow. And we want to be able to get the soil right, so that things can grow. But if it's not growing, we should have the courage to figure out and grasp what is happening at the root. She also says, this is one of my personal favorites, I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I cannot accept. So I just wanted to drop in some of those quotes because typically we just don't hear about them. And so I just wanted to take a moment just to relay some of that, and it all ties in together. But I'll pass it back off to you, Royce.
Thank you so much, Kim, for those wonderful quotes. And I just wanted to tie that into civil rights movements now. Specifically, I don't know if you all see in your screen, we have Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi, and they are the founders of the BLM movement. The BLM movement has been firm, centered, and grown. I love this idea of the roots in the tree, right? If they are that foundational, fertile planters of the seeds that was tilled in the soil of all the folks that we've seen before us and all of these other unfortunate pressurize of oppression, then it's the BLM movement today. And it's forming out of the violence, the death, and from the over 30 Black trans women who were murdered in 2019, the statistic that grew from that in 2020. And, you know, it just, all of this reaction, if you will, to being enough. The radicalization, as Dr. Angela Davis said, right, to actually grasp it at the root has been the BLM movement, just as Stonewall, right, was that revolution that happened in reaction to holding people's lives in their dignity and their inherent worth as that foundation of movement and action. And that really brings us right back to, and I feel like those are the same reasons that, you know, my uncle and his three compatriots went into the Woolworth lunch counter and sat down, right? That's what gave them the courage, right? That's the courage that I grabbed and was brought up with, that allowed me to recognize that our one and only don't ask, don't tell cadet, who was removed from the academy, was not going to suffer. And I brought her into my house so she could go to school without having to pay for it, because she had nowhere else to go. And I was not going to allow that cadet to have her life ruined for an immoral and improper and oppressive system called Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which is also why I work to alleviate it, right? She now is a graduate of law school at Berkeley and is an Army Corps of Engineers lawyer, right? What kind of story is that? Because that's what happens when you make a psychological safe space for people to thrive, right? That's what happens. So these are the types of things that when people say, what's allyship? That's what allyship is. What are we doing when we come together to make radical action? That's what we do. That's how we actually make and take space and make it safe to grow that pyramid.
Wow, thank you so much for that very comprehensive answer, to sort of tying in what we talked about at the beginning of this panel with just sort of how we got here, and to sort of a charge for action, like Kim was talking about with some of those quotes, and how real change actually occurs. I did get the green light that if what we can go over on time on this. So for those of you where we're coming up with about 15 minutes left of the scheduled timing. But the plan will be to most likely go about 30 minutes over, just to ensure that the panelists can say what they are here to say. And then we do have a couple questions that have come in so far from the chat that we want the panelists to be able to touch on. So I just wanted to put that out there now, so that way you can kind of prepare yourself that if you do need to drop off in 15 minutes, you can, but you are also more than welcome to stay with us as we finish up in this conversation. So we have one more scheduled question before we sort of do final thoughts and then answer the questions from the Q&A. But I really do appreciate sort of the discussion on history, because Black queer voices have been historically forgotten during this month specifically. And sometimes it may not be intentional, and sometimes it is intentional, and that's throughout history. And so having this event today is such a step in the right direction for fixing that issue within the Coast Guard specifically, because today we are primarily focusing on Black queer experiences. And so again, super thankful to the panelists so far, your courage, it is inspiring. And we will continue with the inspiration with this final question, because what we found in our discussions leading up to this panel was that a common intersection amongst our 4 panelists is they all have very strong military backgrounds within their immediate families. And so there was no way we can talk about these inspirational people without talking about the inspirational people that have got them to where they are today. And so our final question, and all panelists are going to touch on this, and we're going to start with OS1, Aaron Womack-Gilliam, but the question is going to be the same for all 4, is have you seen any progress as you look back on your own history, but also as you look back on your family's military history?
Thank you for that. Thank you for that question. When I look back at as a whole of my family's history, my great grandfather served in the Army as a cook in World War II. I have a great uncle that served in the Army as well, I think in the 70s, 80s, I believe. And my dad, as you see, he joined 1990. Excuse me, Dad, if I messed it up a little bit. But as you see, he went from a seaman to now retired as a lieutenant. And me, myself, as going from a seaman to OS1, and within that time period, you see progress, but can we really call it true progress? I think Malcolm X said this quote, and I'm just gonna read it. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6, that's not progress. If you pull it out all the way, that's not progress. The progress comes from healing the wound the blow made. And they haven't begun to pull the knife out, and they won't even admit the knife that's there. So when you think of from the time of just slavery, or when Blacks were able to join the military, to gay LGBTQ plus people being able to join the military. Yes, it's a change, but it's still that acknowledgement that we always miss. And so that's where I am with the progress. Now, if we can go, I think a slide forward, I want to say, as you see, is me and my dad doing the Old Glory flag ceremony. This is at his retirement. And when we did that and he saluted me and I saluted back, and we were folding the Old Glory, it felt like I was taking over the watch. And it wasn't so much that I was taking over the plight that he had to deal with, because it's always been there, but I'm taking from what he's taught me, because he is my Batman, my Superman, all in one, you know, as far as. So I take from what he has done in his career and his time and service, and I'm going to progress in it to continue that change, you know. And when I see him, as I said, a seaman, I've seen him in magazines, I've seen him in commercials, and still he had to deal with racism. He still had to deal with the smart comments or the isolation of his peers, but him himself had to press forward. So I think as an individual, when we think of progression, as myself, we are going to continue to progress as people. We're just waiting for society to catch up, so to speak. So that's how I view it.
Thank you so much, OS1. Appreciate the thoughts and the wonderful pictures of you and your family, and sort of walking us through that. And I love the idea of you saying you're taking over the watch, and I think that's really powerful. Next, we are going. Oh, I apologize. There's another slide of pictures. It's hard for me to see the preview, and I should have known that. But is there anything you want to explain further in these 3 pictures, or not?
No, it speaks for itself. Just as you can see, the strength in the pictures that I've shared, as just the strength, really.
Thank you so much. Next, we are going to hear from Lieutenant Commander Kimberly Young-McClear. Dr. Young-McClear, please share your answer to this question.
Yeah, thanks, Caleb. Yeah, there's just so much. So I'm going to say it concisely, but I want to also honor my family, especially my parents that are on this call, and also my brother and just my sibling, sister, in-laws, and so forth. But I grew up in a military household. I'm the only Coastie. Everyone else is Air Force. And the picture to the left, it was at my mom's retirement. She did nearly 30 years, so did my dad. And she retired at Chief Master Sergeant, which is equivalent to an E9. And I just remember just growing up and going to their offices on the base, and they just always carried themselves with just an immense amount of dignity and pride and professionalism. And even as a kid, I can kind of see the dynamics even between enlisted and officer. And so I'm kind of just taking it all in. And they grew up in Trinidad and Tobago, and they would tell me these stories of how they, especially like in the 70s, there was a lot of, it was kind of out of the norm to speak with an accent. And so I remember at home, they would have these conversations about, this mindset of assimilation. And so I even remember, like, as a kid, that, my parents instilled through their own military service that we're really fighting for everyone to serve authentically. The picture to the right, according to that article, it says I was 4, so that's me, probably the shortest one in the picture. But again, that just speaks to just the pride that my parents had on active duty, both member to member serving. And so my first childhood memories was in Kadena in Japan. And that also gave me some cultural experiences as well. The first pictures of my sister, she just found out recently, she's a DADT teacher, but we just found out recently that she was selected as a 2021 Teacher of the Year for Korea, which is huge. And I think she's going to be rising up to the next levels of that particular recognition program. So I'm just super proud of her. And that's also another common theme in my family is we're military educators, or a combination of the two. Brother-in-law, this month actually is 20 years since he has passed away. So he's always in our hearts, and he had a great career in the Air Force. So again, all of these are just, part of me, my memories. And then this last slide, I'm laughing at my brother's picture because he always is just like a serious face. And I'm laughing because I remember my brother's like, he has few words sometimes. And I remember when I was like really just in the thick of just being harassed and bullied, and I'm kind of just talking to him about it. And I'm just using my platform to try and make a difference for others. He says to me very succinctly, and he said, "You must really love the Coast Guard." And that's just always stuck with me. That's kind of like his humor, but truth in one. And so he's now doing air traffic controller. He was a air traffic controller of the year. So him and his family are out in California. And actually his wife, my sister-in-law, she's actually in the Air Force, and she's in doing a training out in Florida. And last but not least, I wanted to acknowledge my dear wife, Sweetie Pie, Gail. So we were 2 of 6 women featured on the cover of Glamour. And we actually were for the first time in Glamour's history, they featured just like regular women, not people who were like models. And so they did a feature story for the Crown Act, and specifically the story that we had was in 2013 and 14, we helped we're the first branch to do so, but we helped change the policy and then change the policy to allow the style that she has now, locks, to be a prohibited style. So again, that just speaks to the authenticity that we're fighting for. So the quote there is that we shouldn't accept any type of discrimination, period. Yeah, so that's the very condensed timeline, but we have a lot of military history, and that's just rooted in what we believe in serving this country for, you know, a generation of people coming from the Caribbean to the United States. It's really just rooted in service. So thanks for allowing me to share.
Thanks so much, Dr. Young-McClair. We appreciate that. I'm blown away every time I see the cover of Glamour. It is just an amazing, amazing picture of two incredibly wonderful human beings. So next up, we are going to hear from, why is this thing not, there we go. From CS2 Deshaun Wade about the same question.
Thank you. Yeah, so I also come from a military family. I grew up a military brat, definitely. But I do have to round it back to my inspirational person, my mom, because she is just who she is. But as far as progress, like my mom, she grew up, you know, during, you know, the civil rights movement during Stonewall, and not to give away her age because she doesn't look a day over 25. She went through all that, joined the military, went through everything she went through, my dad as well. And to think back on, you know, some of the things that they endured, and to think 10 years later, 10 plus years later, you know, to go through not the exact same things, but still some of the same challenges when it comes to, you know, racism, discrimination. It's really hard to say, yes, we've made, you know, progress. Yes, it's there, but it gets to a point to where, are we there enough to really count it as progress? To know that, you know, I have members that have come to me that have, you know, stressed to me or come to me in a situation to where they've been called the N-word by members of, you know, the Coast Guard. And it's kind of like, to think that for someone who is in this day and time in the Coast Guard, where we have our core values, to have that word so comfortably in their vocabulary, to say it to another member, it's kind of hard to say that, yeah, we've progressed so far and everything is great. When some people will tell you that, it's like, oh, we've come so far, things aren't as bad as they used to be. They'll sit down and have a conversation with you or have meetings, and it's like, is this meeting just to check a box to make you feel comfortable? Because until I see progress, I'm not going to feel comfortable. So to answer the question, yes, there has been progress. Is there a long way to go? Yes, there is. And before I hand it back over, I cannot leave my sister out, because if she is watching right now, she will not let me live it down. So yes, my sister also served. She is also a very inspirational person in my life, going from serving the Army to now being a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner. Yes, but oh, thank you for the slide, because I almost forgot about this. So yes, as far as you know, progress goes, I couldn't help but bring up this graph, and it just shows the race and gender throughout the military branches. And on the next slide, it'll show, if you remember back up, it shows the orange is actually Blacks in the military. And out of all the branches, there are not many Blacks in the military. And like I stated before, being gay also makes you kind of the minority of the minority. So picture that orange block being a whole lot smaller. And for us to have progress and for this to become a service that is diverse and inclusive and safe, we have to have representation. We can't have representation if those that can fully represent our service feel safe to do so. So as far as progress goes, it all starts with the conversation. I've gone leaps and bounds with, many members, crew members, just sitting down and having a conversation of understanding each other, where each other has come from. We may not agree on everything, but when it comes to the morals and inclusivity and someone feeling safe and someone just being able to live and be their authentic self, there should be no swing one way or another. It should be an equal line and we should all be on that same page. Thank you.
Thank you so much, CS2 Deshaun Wade. Appreciate that. And thank you for bringing some great visuals to kind of very succinctly and adeptly show physically the sort of disparity between different ethnicities and things of that nature and races and then you can't even really accurately capture sexual orientation and gender identity in something like this, so in terms of data. So thank you again, and thank you for sharing your family with us. Last but certainly not least, on this question we have Dr. Royce James. Turn it over to you.
Thanks, Caleb. I just want to give another shout out to the absolute necessity and need for an actual account. We actually need data for within the Coast Guard. We have to get data on our community, on the queer community within the Coast Guard must be taken. Otherwise, we can't even talk about equity because we can't find the gaps. So if we can't define the gaps, then we can't close them. So it just has to be done. We have to do all disaggregated by all the demographics, and that just goes right back into my own family history. I gave a talk earlier, this actually February 1st, which was the anniversary of the February 1st Greensboro sit-in, the Greensboro 4. Those of you that had me in class, you're seeing a repeat because I always do my February Black History Month with that picture and ask lots of questions. And so definitely, the moral courage that happened there and the psychological safety that my mom provided my uncles, and the psychological safety, Aggie Pride, I see it in there. Thank you, Captain West, absolutely. And the psychological safety that the then segregated communities within Greensboro offered these four gentlemen, and standing up to say no more to oppression is exactly the things that we're talking about. I know there's lots of questions inside here about what allies can do, and a lot of it is about speaking out and speaking up and taking space and taking that space and making it safe for those to speak and be heard that are being marginalized and oppressed, right? And wherever you can do that with that inherent worth and dignity is the way to start. If you could go to the next, thank you. So just some of my personal story, my dad, Lee James, was he was absolutely my hero. He struggled late in life with alcoholism, a huge thing that affected our family, and I feel like he was able to really. You never leave alcoholism, right? It's something that stays with you, but he was able to wake up sober for all his days and the rest of his life, and then died from lung cancer from Agent Orange when I was 16. Had a real effect on me in my life, and we could talk about that another day. But I grew up marching in color guard. I didn't know you could have a bed made with a hospital corners. I was born on Andrews Air Force Base on Memorial Day. Like, this whole military thing has been huge. And next to him is General Lee McCain, which is my mom's brother, who was in the Navy. My uncle Artiza was also in the Army. If you go to the next slide, please. My aunt Ishtar, which is Artiza's twin, was a senior master sergeant in the Air Force. Like, it's so just everywhere. And then this is again my dad. He started off as a private and went all the way to W2. There's my sister, Joy Sharpie, who is also a private in the Army and then went into Army Reserves. I have nieces that have fought in all of our recent conflicts that are my age, because my brother, who is much older than I am, was in the Navy. Like, this is, our family history was completely entwined. And I do want to say that back to my uncle and my other uncles and my aunt Pacolia Davis, who died this past weekend, who was an Army nurse and then an RN in the DC public schools. My shiro, definitely a familial blow to lose her. Will always live on in my heart. But their father went to college. He didn't finish, but he went to college, and his father was born into slavery. So if we start to like really unfold like what that means, that connection is direct. And I just really wanted to capitalize on the opportunity to pull what Aaron Womack just said about my hero, Malcolm X, and the knife and the healing. And I'm going to pull another one of my heroes, Dr. Kim Young McClear, who says all the time, and I stand up right there next to her saying it with her, there can be no healing without accountability. There can be no healing without accountability. And that brings us right back to that psychological safety piece and what that means for those who have caused the infraction, right? And those that are being harmed. And everyone has to be in relationship in order for that psychological safety to be held and accountability to be there so healing can start. So just wanted to put that out there. If you could go to the next slide. Thanks, Caleb. So again, I just wanted to bring that full circle to my family. I have 4 kids. My oldest there, this was back in 2017. She's now 20. And my youngest is 8, who was just roller skating in and bringing me drinks to keep me hydrated, because I don't know why. She's looking out for me, as she always does. But very, very much so making space for my children in the same way that I try to make space as an ally for all folks. And I feel like that's really how you have to do it. You have to dig, you have to find the space to do it, and you have to literally drive a wedge and create a safe space. If you need a safe space to do that, come see me in 227 The Stoop at the Coast Guard Academy. That's where we have our safe space. Get with me on the phone, get with me in the chat. We will create that safe space, and that will then reverberate out from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. James. I appreciate that. And I'm super grateful as we sort of are wrapping up the orchestrated questionnaire portion of this, just for your time, your energy, your emotional energy, for sharing and sharing your families with us, and also sharing your personal experiences with us. It is inspiring, and it is hopefully motivating for folks to sort of see that, change is possible if we get enough people around the idea that we can hold people accountable and also move for justice. I think that is what we're here for. And there are some folks that just have never been heard on that front. So we're going to move into our Q&A from the chat. We definitely have a few to get through. I'll probably, since we're going to look to go about 30 minutes over, I'll probably wrap up this with about 5 minutes left, so that way we can do some final statements and closing remarks. But I do want to get into a good amount of discussion, sort of engaging with those who have been in attendance to this. So the first question is going to be specifically for Lieutenant Commander Kimberly Young McClear. And this is from someone in the chat asking, what do you see as your next step in your courageous journey that you sort of spoke about?
Well, thanks. Thanks for that question. I had to kind of pause for a second. It's 2021. I reported to the Coast Guard Academy in 2014. 3 months from now, we'll make it 7 years. And that's a long time. So I struggle with the question because I think the solution is so obvious. So I struggle with where are we even having the question, but I'll just say it succinctly. Justice. accountability, acknowledgement, restoring dignity. These are the things I think that the service needs to do, not just for my case, but for anyone who also had the courage to speak up or report, because you shouldn't have to speak up to report. These things shouldn't be happening in the first place. So as a human being, both Kim Young McClear and also Lieutenant Commander Young McClear, I would like a formal written apology from the Coast Guard. I would like that. I would like for the people who violated our oath, our core values, and the law to be held accountable. Some people say that's too much to ask for. I don't think so. I don't think so. And I think about, I love quotes. So I'm just thinking about Audre Lorde. There's a quote that she says, if I cannot air this pain and alter it, I will surely die of it. And she says that's the beginning of the social protest. So for me, when I spoke out, it really was out of survival, because it was killing me. And so I remain committed to this organization, and on behalf of myself and also my wife, my family, who have been there through all the ups and downs, I don't think that's too much to ask for, considering we do actually come from a military family. So thank you for the question. And I hope that that's not a question that has to be asked again, but that is what I would like. But thank you for the question.
Thanks so much, Kim. And thanks to those who have been asking questions, specifically that one. We've got some more to get to, so I will read the next one, and this is for any panelist to answer, so feel free to just jump in. It's hard to be a Black lesbian in the Coast Guard. How can the Coast Guard, and this kind of goes back to what we're talking about action instead of just, emotion. How can the Coast Guard make changes for the future? And how can the Coast Guard implement that change?
So I don't want to take too much space here. I'll try to be brief. Never give a professor or a preacher like the mic. And so I will say this. I think that there's some outside of the things I've been already saying about dignity, right? Inherent worth and dignity. I think that we have to bring in the people that are the most marginalized to the decision table. We have to really emphasize that pyramid and start to develop actual competencies for the levels, so that people that are in charge can demonstrate they have not only mastered those competencies, but where they have done actions that are commensurate with the actual ranks and positions that they hold, right? This is all that being in relationship with folks, right? And then we have to bring in subject matter experts to meet with all those folks and the policy folks to actually make actual decisions, right? The most marginalized, the people that actually have the keys, the people in charge, and the policy folks, right? In with the subject matter experts all together. That's when we could actually start to affect real change. But when we're still living in fear, when we're still putting up window dressing, right? When we still can't even just give an apology, right? An apology. Like, this is what I tell my kids daily, please, right? If we're talking about dignity, have some empathy for the person, whether or not you feel like you did something wrong, that person, ouch, oops, right? They were hurt. You give an apology, because that's the first step, right? And so I feel like we can't take, we look at these big issues that we're dealing with, and I'm almost done. These big issues that we're dealing with extremism, and we look at how that manifests within our military. And Deshaun gave us a wonderful graphics about how the diminishing, not anywhere near our population of demographics within our institutions. And we wonder where this comes from. Well, we talk about microaggressions in these acts, and it's in pushing aside these ones and twos and threes, and really it's much, much more than that. I would say even 2 orders of magnitude more than that, of people that are being harmed in our service alone, right? If we push those to the side, then we don't have accountability. We can't have healing. We can't move forward. It creates and perpetuates extremism. So if we really want to combat these things, it turns out it comes back down to those bringing the people in, most marginalized, making sure we get the people competencies, right, that need it, which is all of us, bring in the subject matter experts and the policy folks all together to make these changes. And with that, I will pass them on. Thank you.
Yeah, I can just quickly just add, I think we have to do some soul searching. I really think we do. There are obviously great people in the Coast Guard who are doing their best to move in a forward direction to improve our culture. But what I have observed is that it's almost like the clock keeps getting reset. And I would actually like to see us honor our history. I would actually like us to soul search and actually look behind us, because I think we can learn from what's behind us. Culture of respect. What does that look like if we look in the past? That looks like there's a report on culture of respect. That looks like there were survivors who shared their experiences, survivors from across the board. But if people don't know about our history, our stories, then how can we learn from it? And I would argue and challenge and ask, why is that so difficult? And so there's the tears and there's the action. And so I would say that we really have to unpack the power structures. We have to unpack the data as the evidence. We have to unpack the qualitative and the storytelling. And we have to put that together, as Royce is saying, with the subject matter experts, with the survivors, with the leadership, with the decision makers at the same exact time. If you have a culture which is driving those various individuals and groups apart from each other, in my opinion, we will never get to sustainable progress where everybody can thrive. So I just wanted to add that. I think that we have to do some soul searching, and I think that we have to be what we're saying we are. And that takes work. And if we're willing to do the work, join us. Join any group who's willing to do the work. So that would just be my quick add-on, but it's a phenomenal question.
CS2 or OS1, would you like to add anything to that?
I would just like to add this one thing. When we say representation, we mean unbiased representation as well. It can't just be someone that is for one side or for the other. It is for the collective. And so we do need the subject matter experts. We need the ones that are specialties. We need the ones that are the policymakers and that community to bring out change. And we can't be afraid of that change. An apology takes nothing of time. Accountability takes nothing, because from accountability, then you know where to move forward to. So I would say, as a Black lesbian, from the question, how can you see the change? Find a way to be involved as well. If that's where your heart leads you, you know. And if it doesn't lead you, that connect in a group that is of a welcoming or a safe space. Those are my 2 cents.
Thank you.
I just feel like now I have to get my 2 cents because everybody else did. So honestly, real quick, all I wanted to say is I feel like, for one, go beyond this mindset of, or this act of just checking a box. I feel like that's, I don't know, it's just one of my biggest pet peeves. I feel like in my years that I feel like things go to checking a box, which means that I'm going to say this or do this to the point of where I feel that you are comfortable, but I don't really know. But me thinking that you're comfortable helps me sleep at night, rather than caring about whether you're going to feel safe and if you're going to sleep good at night. So I think get past checking that box and just having that one-time conversation and thinking that, you know, all of it's going to go away, because clearly nothing has changed. And also stepping outside of what we feel is comfortable, because it's always, if I have to have this conversation, then, you know, or not knowing how to have a conversation, or having a conversation and not knowing what to say. Like, it's so easy. We all went through school. We know how to do research. So if you don't know how to answer the question, then you go and do your research. A perfect platform is Coast Guard Spectrum, because there's a lot of people here that can answer that question for you and give you all the steps and the right answers and how to answer it correctly. Because sometimes people just don't feel like they just don't know how to answer a question properly without offending somebody. So I'd say get out of your comfort zone, do the research, and let's step beyond just checking the box.
Thank you all for those answers. We have a comment that was made and then one final question to sort of round out the discussion. But I think that it would be, we would be remiss if we did not include this. This was a comment from an active duty queer member on the West Coast, but they decided to remain anonymous because the fear of potential retaliation of their name being revealed on this comment is very real. And this is a real-time example, I think, to everyone still here with us, of the fear that still exists for Black queer people within our organization. So I'm going to read this comment. And this is speaking in their voice. I don't lack faith in the Coast Guard's ability to change its culture. I lack its constitution to do the same. White supremacy is a threat to all people of color within the Coast Guard, and it's also a threat to queer and trans people. Until Coast Guard leadership decides to have the courage to protect women, queer and trans people, Black and other people of color, I cannot consciously maintain confidence within that same leadership. Our culture will not change until our leadership has the guts to use the appropriate language to address the issue that has existed within our ranks for decades, the same way it has existed in American culture since its founding. Extremism in any form of its forms is wrong. We know that. However, white supremacist extremism is the tangible threat to national security within the United States. Our government and law enforcement agencies are finally willing to admit as such based on the evidence. The Coast Guard needs to have the courage to do so as well. If alienating or calling out white people within the Coast Guard is a fear that leadership has, then I encourage the leadership to deeply reflect upon the values they claim to uphold and the standards they want its members to uphold. As I exit this service into medic's retirement, I'd like to see the Coast Guard I served 20 faithful years in as a Black queer person be courageous in the pursuit of cultural change and equity when it comes to the subjects of racism, sexuality, gender, and white supremacy within its ranks. I think that's as authentic as it comes, right? And I'm so grateful to the member who had the courage, the moral courage to speak up and say this. And we stand in solidarity, and that's why we're here today is to hopefully ignite some passion behind this, because this is an important discussion that we've had today. The final sort of question that we'll end with in terms of our panelists, it's giving us their time before we close out the whole thing, is there's been quite a few questions sort of surrounding allyship and specifically cisgender white male allyship, and then also creating safe spaces and creating psychologically safe spaces. And so I will ask the panelists touch a bit on that. But before they do that, I do want to put a plug for Spectrum, because have more questions about psychological safety? Well, fear not, look no further. Coast Guard Spectrum actually conducts training on this. We do psychological safety workshops. We have one coming up in March. And so we will be sure to communicate this through our channels. I'm sure PACAREA will want to disseminate the information for that. But if you like what you hear about psychological safety and being psychologically safe, we go into greater depths in our training. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to the panelists to briefly sort of touch on, with the last 4 or 5 minutes that we have, on tangible examples for folks, specifically those who are not as marginalized, on how they can be good allies on creating those psychologically safe spaces.
For allyship, or for the majority towards the minority, listen, listen is one of the biggest things that you can do, is listen to what the stories that you're hearing, and if it makes you feel uncomfortable, you know, we can talk through it, you know, to get an understanding. But listening is, that's where I can just answer on.
I would say real quick is look past the uniform. Yes, all the uniforms look the same, but the person that has them on is not. Everybody goes through different things. And if it's something that you may even think that that person may be going through, don't hesitate to reach out. You know, check on your shipmates, check on each and every one of them. That's all.
Thank you for having me on this panel. I'll make it short and sweet. I don't want for my mom and dad to have any regrets that I chose to join the Coast Guard. I don't want for my wife to be tearful when she sees the effects of what has happened when I have been authentically myself. So there are specific techniques, but it's also, you know it when you feel safe. But I'll pass it off to Royce. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thank you, panelists. Honored to serve with all of you. Admiral Fagan, thank you for having the moral courage to hold this space with us. We greatly appreciate that. And I don't want to be really brief because I've been talking about allyship quite a lot. Not that it's not one of my favorite things to talk about. I do think that Brian Steverson has a really great perspective on this, and you can go and read up about him and his journey and what he's done. There's movies about him and everything. But specifically about being proximate. And then I will take that a lot of step further, thinking about Fannie Lou Hamer and a lot of my other heroes. And you can't just step into a proximate space without doing some, again, soul searching and understanding of where people are and why. So it's hard to say you can be an ally without understanding a plight or understanding like what's going on around you. So I really feel like, and I'm going to go back to it, start with psychological safety. If you can create a psychologically safe space, you will have done leaps and bounds towards allyship. If you can create a space where people can feel comfortable in their skin, where they feel like they can question, where they feel like they can do that and do it safely, where they can contribute, right? Then you've created a safe space, a psychologically safe space that will reverberate out, because it'll be during your journey of figuring out how to do that, you will have changed yourself and transformed the spaces around you, right? That's what we try to do in every space that we enter into at Spectrum, is create those spaces so people can feel like they can take it and create more of those spaces. And I really do hope the Coast Guard will start to continue to do that, so that way we can all feel psychologically safe. But things will start to really pick up from there, right? We have to get a little momentum going, starting with those psychologically safe spaces. That's where we start. Thank you so much for listening to us, and I greatly appreciate being a part of this panel.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Lieutenant Kevin Adams to say a last piece, and then I'll close us out to finish out the event.
Thanks, Caleb. I actually do see OS1's Womack Gilliam has his hand up. Is there something else you wanted to say?
Yes, sir. I just wanted to just say thank you, Admiral and CG Spectrum, for this opportunity. Thank you, panelists, and the audience, but also thank you to the family members of the panels or the service members. They go through a lot that doesn't get discussed as well, and they're down in the trenches as well with us. So I just want to say thank you. So.
Awesome. Thanks, OS1. Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks, Caleb. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to our panelists. It's been a journey for myself, volunteering for this role and learning more about what we need to be doing to make our service more equitable, and everything that you all spoke about today. It is a challenge. It's not easy, but we all need to do our part, and we all need to step up and be brave. So you've each inspired me, you've educated me. I and we as a community in the Coast Guard are honored to serve along each side one of you. Thank you for your boldness in showing us how to do it right. I'd also like to extend a huge thank you again to the families and also to Commander Hannah Kawamoto, our PACAREA leadership diversity officer. She has put in countless hours in preparing this event and has also displayed incredible leadership, bravery, humility, and it's been inspiring. So thank you. And thank you for all for calling in. We really appreciate your time, and be safe and take care.
Yep. I just wanted to say one last thing before we actually sign off, and that is I cannot speak enough to the courage and the strength of our panelists. And I am daily inspired and daily honored to serve alongside you, and to know you and to be friends with you. And so thank you so much for giving us this gift, because this is a gift to be able to listen to you and learn from you. And I hope anyone who's still on is inspired to really start to figure out where their role in this lies. So I want to thank Vice Admiral Fagan on behalf of Spectrum for giving us the platform and having the moral courage of joining with us for that. And I want to thank Commander Kawamoto as well, because she has done a lot of work for Spectrum and advocated for us and allowed us to have this happen today. So thank you so much. And yes, that is really all I have. We are over our time by just 31 minutes, so we could go all day on this, but I think this is being recorded, as I see in the thing there. I'm gonna stop my share. It's being recorded, so the recording will eventually be accessible to those who want to see it. Yeah, it's replayable, so it's good stuff that you may want to watch again. So that's all I have. I don't think there's anything else. Again, we're still open to questions. Coast Guard Spectrum is on Facebook. We have a website, coastguardspectrum.com. You can email us. We'll be willing to have discussions with anybody. And once again, thank you to the panelists and the families of the panelists. And that's all I have. Thank you so much.